morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Welcome our home church. Let us prepare our heart toward heaven. Let us sing holy song. Page 196, we gather together. 196, we gather together.
We gather together to ask the Lord's blessing. He chastens and hastens His will to make known. The wicked oppressing now cease from distressing. Sing praises to His name, He forgets not His own. Beside us to guide us, our God with us joining, ordaining, maintaining His kingdom divine. So from the beginning, the fight we were winning, Thou, Lord, wast at our side, all glory be Thine. We all do extol Thee, Thou leader triumphant, and pray that Thou still our defender will be. Let Thy congregation escape tribulation, Thy name be ever praised, O Lord, make us free.
Thank you. Next song is Psalm 19. You have a seat in the book.
What number?
Psalm 19.
This is taken from Psalm 19 in the Bible, verses 7 through 10. Verse 10 is the chorus, and verses 7, 8, and 9 become the verses. So there's different versions of the translation, but this is the one we chose. The Lord is perfect, converting the soul. The testimony of the Lord is sure, making wise the simple. More to be desired are these than gold, than much fine gold, sweeter also than honey, and the honeycomb. The statutes of the Lord are right, rejoicing the heart. The commandment of the Lord is pure, enlightening the eyes. More to be desired are these than gold, than much fine gold, sweeter also than honey, and the honeycomb. The fear of the Lord is clean, enduring forever. The judgments of the Lord are true, and righteous altogether. More to be desired are these than gold, than much fine gold, sweeter also than honey, and the honeycomb. More to be desired are these than gold, and much fine gold, sweeter also than honey, and the honeycomb. Sweeter also than honey, and the honeycomb.
Thank you. Next song is 24.
What number?
24.
24.
Suffering Heart. 24, Suffering Heart.
These words were written by True Father, and it's a bit longer of a song, but it's really, and it's because of that, it's often ignored in our church, because it's not sort of what they consider to be an uplifting, kind of cheerful thing, but it's actually a very beautiful, probably the most beautiful song in our songbook, Suffering Heart. And it tells actually Father's journey through darkness, finally bringing victory. So it's like Father's poem, Crown of Glory, Suffering Heart. Darkness gaining power within, tempting my soul to fall. Weak is my heart, blurred are my thoughts, soon I am overcome. Blind to the truth, losing the way, thinking of myself, so I can see how sin began, sprouting within my soul, so I can see how sin began, sprouting within my soul. When my Lord came over to me, I would not hear his voice. Blinded and deaf, closing my heart, I ran away from him. So I remained lost in desire, only for myself, grieving the Lord suffered for me, going again to the cross, grieving the Lord suffered for me, going again to the cross, to restore the black lonely night, held by the power of sin. Deserts he crossed, walking the way, climbing the rocky peaks, searching for us, people of sin, who deserve to die. How then could I ever begin thanking the Lord for such grace? How then could I ever begin thanking the Lord for such grace? To defeat the power of death, fighting the realm of sin, I sought the Lord, longing for him, bridegroom of my soul, tortured my heart, suffering alone, fighting deepest pain. Finally today I greet the Lord, gaining all comfort from him. Finally happiness. Always before, stung by my sin, I was doomed to die. Finally today I am reborn, filled with abundant new life. Finally today I am reborn, filled with abundant new life. Oh, my dearest heavenly bride, now you've come home at last. Deserts you crossed, searching for me, climbing the rocky peaks. You persevered, faithful to me, longing for this day. How you become lovely to see through all your suffering and pain. How you become lovely to see through all your suffering and pain. Come, oh come, together we'll sing songs of eternal praise. Taste now, my God, treasure so pure, heaven's gift for you. All of my heart waited for you, yearning for this day. All of my heart waited for you, now I can give you my love. All of my heart waited for you, now I can give you my love.
Thank you. Let us stand up and bow to every parent, God, and true parents. Please stand up. And today is Sunday morning, 2018, May 20. Let us bow to Heavenly Parent, God, and true parents. Bow. Hello. Join me in prayer. 사랑에 하시는 하나님 아버지 참 부모님 안녕하십니까? Our precious heavenly parents, God and true parents, good morning. We are grateful to receive new day and new week. This day is very special in our heart to come in front of you to be humbly. Heavenly parents, God, how are you? This world is changing so quickly. We can see the news, the young people shooting in the school, and Hawaii, the volcano is still active, and another country, the Syria, and our country is fighting the war, and so on, the world hunger and disease. So many things that is happening in this world. Yet, we couldn't find your voice so clearly. Nobody could understand your providence, how God exists, how God moved your spirit in our life. Jesus came 2,000 years ago, the promised to return. Now the time that 2,000 is passing, but we know that our Unification Church, we found that our second coming of Christ. Still, we have a responsibility to listen or not listen. He taught us that what was happening in the beginning of human race. The love was not centering you. You gave the commandment to Adam and Eve, but Adam and Eve couldn't keep the commandment. Don't eat fruit. It means that don't have until the mature man and woman to have a relationship with love and centering God. That was lost. That's why our generation couldn't know the God and your truth, and we didn't know about lineage. The Messiah, second coming of Christ, the Reverend Samuel Moon brought us the God's thought, the parentism. That's profound the idea to renovate the children can understand and digest and practice. He showed us that his own life, the 93 years of life, is giving truth and tortured and prison and bleeded and so many times the deep wept and the cried and but he never gave up to save us. Now the time we have to inherit the heart of Father, to never give up, never surrender. We keep promise to you faithfully, and we can promise to you to become filial son, daughter. Please guide today that our pastor can give us a hint to we can carry on your heart and to practice or that the Messiah showed us to love each other, love another, to respect and love. Through that, we can bring the original ideal word of kingdom of heaven in this earth. Please guide our original heart and mind and conscience can stronger than evil. We encourage people to goodness around of us. Through that, we can bit by bit, we creating kingdom of heaven in this earth. Please guide this time to reflect and repent in front of you, Heavenly Parents, and sincere heart and a devotional heart. We love you, we dedicate it in front of you, and we can make it happen in our lifetime. Please guide this time to our pastor, give us inspiration of your spirit and heart, and we can inherit and promote the goodness around us. We are so grateful this time. Please join us and please come in our heart, each of our heart, and we can invest our heart to you and to others and to the world to make the kingdom of heaven in our hand. Thank you very much. We report in the name of Raman and Tamiko Montanaro, blessed Sentinel family. Aju, Amen. Thank you very much. Please seated. And welcome Pastor Montanaro.
Hi, everybody. So today I was praying and I realized May 20th was the first day I met Father. Actually, it was this day, 34 years ago. I'd been in our movement for about 4 years, and I'd been living on the West Coast, and Father had done most of his activity in America on the East Coast. So we never had a chance to see him. And I had devoted myself very seriously to our movement. I had gone fundraising for like a year and a half in carp, and I later would do another 2 years, in carp, 3.5 years of fundraising. But I also had gone pioneer witnessing and done different activities. And I had struggled a lot too with my fallen nature and sin, and I'd really gone through a lot. But I never met Father. I'd only read Father's speeches and heard testimonies from various members, but I had never met Father. And so I was finally on the East Coast and doing a 40-day workshop with Kevin McCarthy, and we had a chance to go to Belvedere, which is where Father would speak publicly in America most of the time. It was actually a garage, right, that was converted to a small service area. Father would stand on a small platform about this high, made out of wood. I remember the lattice wood, right, of that platform very well. I can remember the bead of wood around the edge of it, because I would try to get to the front. Sometimes we would gather at the gate. The gates would open at 4:30 in the morning. Father would speak at 5 in the morning. So we would get there. We'd wake up at 3 in the morning, get out there. By 3:30 we'd be driving to get there on time, and we'd want to be the first ones at the gate. And we would get there at 4:30 in the morning, and then we would sprint. And I was in really good shape then. I remember me and Steve Woolery were the two CARP members. Steve was trying to be a marathoner before he met our church. So he loved running. He just loved running. And he would, captains on MFT, which is the mobile fundraising teams that we were on, captains hated him because he didn't really care about making any money. All he wanted to do was run. So he would run from house to house and business to business. You want something? No? Okay. And he'd just take off. He'd make nothing, all day long, but he'd run a lot, He would tear up area, So they'd give him like 2 miles and he'd just cover the thing in just an hour or two. He'd be running everywhere he went. We all ran, but he loved to run. And I loved to run too. But he and I remember we were racing each other down. It's about a half a mile from the gate to down the hill and up the hill and down the next hill to the garage, and maybe less than half, maybe a quarter of a mile. And we would run it, and we would sprint, and we were the first ones there. And we would race inside, take our shoes off, and we'd sit right in the front on the brother's side, the right side, so Father could see us and that kind of thing. I don't know where I was sitting this day. I don't think I was right in the front. It was my first time there at Belvedere, and I think I was like 2 rows back. And we were singing, and I remember we were singing Garden of Restoration, which we didn't sing today, but it's another beautiful song. And Father came in, and he had just been praying for 3 days. He hadn't slept for 3 days. The Supreme Court on May, I think it was 18th or 16th, had just decided that they would not hear the case that our friend Jeff knows a lot about the case. Inquisition is a great book. If you want to go online, you can get it, telling the story of Reverend Moon's court case in America. How basically he was framed. He was set up by the Justice Department and the IRS so that he would take the fall, because they wanted to get rid of him. Actually, they didn't want him to go to prison. They wanted him to stay in Korea and never come back. But he came and faced the charges and was understandably a jury of his peers, which I don't think could exist. But that's an oxymoron, a jury of his peers. But the jury convicted him of tax evasion, and he was thrown in prison in Danbury Federal Penitentiary for 11 months, and then a month and a half in a halfway house in Long Island. And this was right before he went to jail. And he had been convicted by the lower court, but the appellate court, the second court of appeals, had split decision, and so it had to go to the Supreme Court. The one dissenting judge on the 3 panel of judges in the appellate court had said that the case offers so many violations of Reverend Moon's constitutional rights that I will not allow him to go to jail until it's been heard by the Supreme Court, or the Supreme Court has rejected hearing it. So the case went before the Supreme Court, and I think they took a cowardly way, and they didn't want to even hear the case. And by that point, 40 different ministers and groups like the ACLU were from the left to the right. The ACLU was very far left, as you know, politically, but they joined, and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, Martin Luther King's old group, they joined in amicus briefs. Amicus, of course, means friend, right? Amici in Italian, right? Amigo in Spanish. Amicus in Latin means friend. So amicus curiae are friends of the court. It means friends of the person who is being convicted. And they're writing briefs, basically legal documents, saying why they believe, written by lawyers, why they believe that this person's innocent. And 40 briefs were submitted on behalf of Father to the Supreme Court. 40 briefs. From the ACLU, from the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, from Jerry Falwell's group. Some of you may remember the Moral Majority. Jerry Falwell, senators, Senator Hatch in Utah, and many other senators and congressmen wrote amicus briefs. Never before has there so many amicus briefs been sent to the Supreme Court saying this man is innocent, you've got to hear this case. And they rejected the case. It was a shocking kind of blow. And the decision was made just 3 days before I saw Father. And he'd been praying. It was like a crucifixion. And Father had been praying for 3 days. And when he came in, his eyes were like pools of sorrow. And he'd been crying and praying for America. And when he came in, I just burst into tears. I just saw his face, and I burst into tears, and I was crying for 45 minutes. I couldn't stop crying. I couldn't even look at him. And he spoke from his deep heart, loving America, how much he had loved America. And when he went to jail, he went with a smile on his face, trying to encourage us, don't be sad, don't worry, everything will be fine. And when he came out in August of 1985, he was welcomed by a banquet with 1,800 Christian ministers that had opposed him for 20 years in America, that were united in common suffering fellowship with Reverend Moon for his unjust imprisonment. So through his imprisonment, he was able to bring a victory that he couldn't bring without, in all the years before, the Christian ministers wouldn't listen. But now finally, many of them began listening to divine principle and hearing what he was teaching. And anyway, they became friends of our movement and friends of our church. And the spirit in America changed. But Father paid for that by going to jail, going to prison. And he said in the prison, don't think, even though it was not a maximum security prison, it was full, prison is a terrible place, Father said. It's a place where the most complaints you'll ever hear are in prison, he said. Everyone believes that they've been unrighteously put in jail. Everyone believes that they've been given the shaft, that they shouldn't be there. And they're complaining all the time about the people that betrayed them and let them, there's constant complaints and resentment. And these people are not fun people to be with. And they don't want to do anything. And so the prison kitchen was a disaster. It was just grease this thick, old grease that's stinking, like rotten grease that's been there for years. And the kitchen was covered with this black, grayish, brown grease. The bathroom, the men, the urinals, nobody wanted to clean it. The bathroom, they had cleaning duty, but no one wanted to clean it. So men, when they go to the bathroom, they splash, especially if they're going to urinal. So if you don't clean it, the wall and the floor around the urinal can get splashed. So if you keep this up for a week or 2 weeks, it starts to become quite a sizable amount of urine. So after a while, the men don't want to step in that. So they would stand like 2-3 feet back. And then it just gets worse and worse. And by the end of months and months of this, it's just a yellow crud all over the wall and floor. And that's what the bathrooms were like in this prison. And Father took a rag. He washed all the rags in the kitchen by hand, and he scrubbed the kitchen down. The prisoners were shocked. They said the kitchen has never been this clean in the time they've been there. He cleaned the kitchen. He kept it clean the entire time he was there. And he cleaned the bathroom by hand. So it was spotless. He kept it clean. So this is the standard. He woke up every morning at 3:30 to pray. But no one ever saw him sleep. He wouldn't even go under the covers. He slept on the top bunk. Most people want the bottom bunk because it's easier. And Mr. Matsuzaki, Mr. Kamiyama was there with him, a Japanese man, for just 6 months. And Mr. Kamiyama offered him the bottom bunk, but he said no, and he slept on the top bunk. And he never went under the covers because he wanted to be able to get up quickly and not have to make the bed. So he just lay down on the bed and went to sleep, and he would wake up. And Mr. Kamiyama never saw him sleeping, because he would go to bed after Mr. Kamiyama, wake up before him, and pray. And he wanted to know where the prison chapel was, and no one had ever used it. Nobody goes there. So he would go there and pray every morning. So this was his standard. So you understand, Reverend called Danbury, where he was imprisoned, like a country club. He said, this is a spa. He said, compared to the prisons I've been in North Korea and in Japan and in South Korea, this place is a spa. It's a country club. So, because there's no torture, there's food, pretty good food, and we take care of our prisoners pretty well in the United States, apparently. So he had just found out that the Supreme Court would not hear the case, which meant that the decision of the lower court would stand, and that meant he had to go to prison. And he knew he had to report for prison on July 20th, I believe, of 1984. So he had a few months to prepare. And I saw him the first time that he spoke publicly after he'd found out. That was my first time seeing him. I'd been on the West Coast. And I just wept. And since then I've tried to, all of us who've known Father have tried to live our lives with some sort of, to honor him, so that he would be proud of us. In other words, we wanted to live our lives so that this man would see something of goodness in us, so we could be proud and sit in front of him and not be ashamed of our lives. Because we saw in him a standard of love that just went beyond anything we'd ever seen or heard. And while I was praying, I thought of another example of a man, and I want to share this with you too. Because Father said, was asked one time, who was the greatest American of the 20th century? And he said Martin Luther King Jr. And we know that Martin Luther King Jr. Lived his life and was assassinated in 1968 for his activity against racism in America. And he taught nonviolence, right? Nonviolent resistance. But he actually learned that from Gandhi. He studied about Gandhi's life. And in 1980s, a film was made about Gandhi's life with Ben Kingsley starring as Gandhi. And I wanted to share with you one scene, my favorite scene, the most moving scene from Gandhi. And it reminds me of these people that go ahead of us, prophets and saints and messiahs, and go ahead of us because they see more than we can see. They see God's heart, they feel God's heart, but they also see the injustice of the world, and they can't stand it, and they make effort to change it, and they become victims of the society. They get assassinated, like King and Gandhi were both assassinated. Father was in prison so many times and tortured to death in North Korea many times. We'll talk about that, but these men and women, they go ahead of us, and they try to show us through their example a more loving way. But they also speak. They're not silent usually. And they judge the society. They judge evil. And because of that, they get hit. And we hit them. And some of us who are lucky enough to maybe meet these people and be humble enough to not hit them, or to try not to hit them, or to try to be more humble to them, we try to make our lives somehow better, but we always feel that we fall short. I don't think there's a single member of our church that feels that we have lived up to Father's standard in our lives. And we know it. And it's a constant feeling of like sort of disappointment right, in our heart about our life. But at the same time, we want to keep improving and getting better. So this one story from the movie Gandhi, where Ben Kingsley, it's a beautiful, beautiful scene, and it's probably the peak of the movie. For me, it's the height of the movie. He is lying in bed in a very rustic sort of, in like an alcove of a house, very dirty and dark, and a delegation of Hindus has come to him to beg him to stop fasting. This is right after the war ended, World War II, and England has given up her colonial claim on India. They've left. And now fighting has broken out between Sikhs and Muslims and Hindus, and especially the Muslim and Hindu fighting was very severe. And there was a lot of killing and violence going on. finally it ended in, which Gandhi didn't want actually, the partition of India into Pakistan in the west, which became Muslim, and India, which was Hindu, and Bangladesh, which became Bangladesh, I think, is
East Pakistan.
East Pakistan, right? It's Hindu, so it's Muslim, and then I think Ceylon, which became Sikh. Sri Lanka became Sikh or Buddhist, maybe Buddhist, and Nepal became Buddhist, and so India was divided into all these religious zones. But Gandhi didn't want that, and so he was fighting for unity. And so a delegation of Hindus had come to him to stop him from fasting because he had started a hunger strike. He had said, "I am not going to eat until India stops fighting." And actually he brought peace. They stopped fighting for a time. But they never could really unite in the parliament. But a delegation of Hindus had come to him, the leaders of the violent resistance, the violence. They come and they promised, please stop fasting, eat again, so that, and we will promise we will stop fighting. And he listens to them, and he believes, he's trusting them, And then they turn to go, but one of them, who's standing in the back, rushes forward and throws some bread on his bed. Says, "Eat!" He says, "Eat!" He says, "I don't want your death on my head too." He says, "I'm going to go to hell, but I don't want your death on my head as well." He says, "I killed a boy. I'm going to go to hell. I smashed his head into the wall." He said, "But they killed my son. The Muslims, they killed my son." And Gandhi's lying on bed, and he says, I know he's very weak because he's been fasting for many, many days, maybe many weeks. And he says, "I know a way out of hell." And the man says, is just trembling, and he says, "Go and find a boy about this tall. About the same height as his son." He said, "They killed my son." He says, "Find a boy about this tall, but be sure he is a Muslim. And raise him as your own son. And one more thing, raise him as a Muslim." And the man turns to go, and then he comes back, and he falls down and starts weeping. He starts weeping, and he kisses his feet. And he says, so he'll do it. That's his way out of hell. That's Gandhi's way out of hell. So, always these great men and women teach us how to get out of hell. But no one more so than the Messiah. And as Alma was praying in her prayer, the second coming of Christ is Reverend Sun Myung Moon. He's the Messiah. He came back. And like Jesus, he lived his life without compromise and with a constant devotion and love to help us see a better way, a higher way of life. Living without fear, without regret, without resentment. Living with love. Living with God at the center of our lives. And of course, he became the victim of every society that he lived in. We already talked about Danbury in America, but that was mild compared to what happened in Korea and in Japan, where he started his ministry. And there's one story that I heard in another 40-day workshop I took with Reverend An, who was actually taught by Father directly as one of the Father's 36 couples, and he was commissioned by Father to teach our members in a 40-day training the deepest content of the divine principle of his teaching. And there was one section of Reverend An's lectures where he talked about Father's tortures. Not just to make us feel bad, but to help us understand Father's heart and what he had gone through and why and what he had prayed for. And in one of these, he talks about how a man tortured Father and delighted in the pain he was causing Father. And it turns out this man had killed many, many Christians because he had been a Christian. And his favorite person to torture was a Christian, especially Christian ministers and pastors. And he would torture them until they, were crying out in pain and screaming out in pain. And he would say, pray to your God. Ask God to save you. And they would pray to God, God, please save me. And he would keep torturing them. And your God's not listening to you, is he? Is he? And he would keep torturing. Now, pray to me. Ask me to stop. Beg me to stop torturing. Deny God and beg me to stop torturing. And these men would be so in pain, they would beg him, please stop torturing. God doesn't exist. It's true, God doesn't exist. And then he would laugh at them and he would kill them. That was the last thing they would do, is deny God, and then they would be killed. This was the man that Father had to torture him. And Father was tortured so badly that blood was coming out of his mouth and his nose and his eyes. His eyes were bleeding, and his backside and everything. Blood was coming out of every part of his body. All his organs were broken. He was beaten and tortured just beyond. But every time they would throw his body in the cell, he would sit up and he would start to pray. And the torturer would listen and would hear it. And he would be praying for him, for the torturer. He would be praying that he could repent and that he could see God. And that he could, that he could find God again. And finally, after a week of this man burst into the cell and said, stop praying for me. I know I'm going to go to hell, but stop praying for me. And then Father taught him how to get out of hell, like Gandhi had taught this man how to get out of hell. And I don't know what he taught him. We don't know what he taught him. And Father never revealed the names of these people, because some of them survived the war and actually were known. They were people that were living in society. And he did not want any of them to be punished by people when they heard about what they'd done. So he never revealed any of these people's names, to us anyway. But this was Father's standard, that he lived like this all his life. Anyway, I saw Father for the first time May 20th, and I think all of us, if you're humble, we're all trying to play catch up. The memory of Father stays in our hearts and minds. Just like for Christians, the memory of Jesus. 2,000 years, the memory of Jesus has stayed in our hearts and minds as Christians. And Jesus only lived for 3 years, and he died on the cross, and his death, while the suffering was great, that's not Jesus' greatest suffering. Suffering that he endured on the cross lasted only a few hours. And many men and women have died more horrendous deaths, right? More suffering. They've gone through more torture or suffering. But that's not the suffering that makes us love Jesus. The suffering that makes us love Jesus is that he could forgive on the cross. The suffering of heart. That on the cross he could, being pierced in the side, mocked, being fed vinegar when he asks for water, having a crown, because they're mocking him being the king of the Jews. They put a crown of thorns on his head, and they twisted it on his head, and so his face, blood was pouring down his head. But this pain was not as great as the pain of seeing all his disciples leave him, all the people he loved leave him, and the chosen people leave him. And the people that God had prepared betraying him and betraying God. And him still forgiving and loving them. Suffering, when you turn off your heart, you can stop your suffering. If you turn off your heart, and then you just suffer physical pain. And a lot of people who have suffered become very resentful and angry and bitter. But the Messiah doesn't. He keeps loving the same people who are torturing him. Father lost his whole family. His oldest son was, we don't go into detail, but all of his sons suffered and difficulties and just left him and didn't. He never couldn't take care of his family because he was busy taking care of us 24 hours a day. He lost his whole family many times. Many of his sons were killed. Many of his children died. Or they lost faith. Or they didn't listen. He lost everything, but he never stopped loving us. So Father's heart, like Jesus' heart on the cross, he said, Father, please forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing. They don't know what they're doing, so please forgive them. that heart to love your enemy. This is the heart of the Messiah. And we are all the Messiah's enemies. Because all of us have fallen way short of where we should be. So when I look at Father on May 20th coming in with tears in his eyes, and when I look at Jesus on the cross, and when I look at Gandhi, and when I look at these men who went ahead of us, they suffered, but we want to live our lives as a testimony to Father. Think about Peter. He denied Jesus 3 times. Jesus came back when he resurrected and asked him, remember, do you love me, Peter? Yes, you know I do, Lord. Again he asked him, do you love me, Peter? You know I do, Lord. Why do you ask me this? Again, 3 times, do you love me, Peter? So 3 times, because of the 3 times he was denied, he was betrayed. So Peter failed Jesus in his lifetime. But at the end of his life, Peter goes out and is willing to die. He takes Paul's example. In the beginning, he and Paul had difficulty, actually. They were fighting, Peter and Paul. But then Peter finally humbles himself and realizes that God is working through Paul. And he goes out to the Gentiles and begins to preach. And he's, of course, captured and imprisoned by the Romans, and they crucify him. But he says, I am not worthy to be crucified in the same manner as my Lord. And so they crucify him upside down. So his life became a testimony. And these disciples, more than Jesus in a sense, these disciples are the foundation of Christianity, right? Because they're the ones who showed the world who Jesus was. Because without them, no one would have known, right? Without Paul, without Peter, without Stephen, without John, without all these disciples going out in the world and being willing to die for their faith, no one would have known who Jesus was. They would have forgotten him. But these, like a stone being thrown in water, the ripples of Jesus' life went out through the ages. And for 2,000 years, until Christianity became the most powerful religion in the world. It's not a coincidence that a religion that began simply with a man being killed on a cross as a criminal with nobody around him, this religion rises to become the strongest religion in the world. And Father, his suffering was the same kind of suffering, but even greater, because he lived his life, his whole life, constantly putting himself in harm's way and loving people until he died at 92 years old, barely able to walk. And he still was praying for us at that last moment of his life. So, for all of us, for all of you, for people at home, please investigate, dig deeper, don't give up, don't deny, and don't give up, and don't write off Reverend Moon. Please don't write off Reverend Moon. That's a huge mistake. Please. And if you already have heard Reverend Moon's teaching and you're a member or a second generation of our church, dig in, dig deeper, and don't give up. Because everything you do is a testimony to Father. And let the ripples of Father's life spread out into the world. And let's bring about the world of peace and freedom and goodness that Father wanted, that God wants, and that every man and woman of faith has lived and died for since the beginning of time. Especially Jesus and Father, but all the saints like Gandhi and Martin Luther King and all the people that we know that have lived their lives for God. So let's all live our lives for God and make yourself an offering, okay? A happy offering, a joyful offering. Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, we're so grateful that we had the example of Reverend Moon Father's life in our lifetime, that we could actually witness the Messiah on earth, walking on earth. His love, his absolute standard, his goodness, the beauty that he had in his heart, Father. I pray that through us, the world can see Father now. Nobody can see Father directly on earth anymore. So it's up to us. And I can see that Father's children, everyone, Father's wife, everybody is trying their best in their own way. Because nobody can forget Father. But Hyungjinim, Yananim, Father's youngest son, are the ones that Father anointed as the heir and successor and resident body of Father on earth. So I pray that we can live our lives with the standard that true parents established. That even if we couldn't do it when we were younger, we can do it when we're older. But especially young people who are hearing what I'm saying, I really hope that they can feel the excitement that Father had to love the world, to fight the good fight, to win the battle against Satan that lives in each person's heart, in my own heart, to win the battle by loving people, by being an example of goodness. I pray that young people can be excited to go out and to build the kingdom of heaven on earth. They don't have to make the same mistakes. When they have their youthful energy, they can give it for Christ. Thank you so much. I ask your blessing on this day. We pray you can be with us this week and that we can always feel your Holy Spirit with us every minute of the day. Thank you so much. I ask your blessing on this day. And we offer everything to you in the name of Raman and Tamiko Montanaro, a blessed Central family, and in the name of all the blessed Central families here and listening, we offer everything to you. 축복 중심 가정 라만과 타미코 모타나리 이름으로 보고 드립니다. 아주. 아멘. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.